Hello, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ryobi PBLRS01B 18-volt brushless reciprocating saw. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot, and it's a fairly good showing here. There's only a little bit of looseness or play to speak of, and I have had zero issues with it dropping batteries or having any sort of interruption going to the motor while the tool is in use. So it's a fairly good showing here. The battery locks into place firmly and securely, and since it is a reciprocating saw that can produce a lot of vibrations, it's very important that it locks in place and stays in place. And like I said earlier, I've had zero issues in operations. Now, this is an HP tool, which means it takes advantage of the Ryobi's HP batteries, and if you want to get the full amount of power that is advertised with this particular saw, you will have to have HP batteries on hand, and they do cost a little bit more than the standard Ryobi battery, so that is something that you need to be aware of. To see if your tool is an HP tool or not, always check to see if there are added battery connectors near the base on the battery slot, and if you do see extra battery connectors on the base of the tool, you know, here on the rear, that means that it can take advantage of the HP batteries, and you will have to use HP batteries to get the most out of it. Now, the smaller HP saw does not actually have the added connectors, so you can use a regular battery in it and it will be able to take full advantage of, well, a regular battery and meet its advertised specifications. But the top saw, since it has those added connectors, must have HP batteries in order to meet its, well, advertised specifications. So yeah, that's, you know, a pretty standard deal with most power tool brands. They have their standard batteries that are good for lights and drills and things like that, and then if you have step up to their power saws, you will need HP batteries. Now, this particular saw still will work with a regular battery, don't get me wrong there, it just isn't going to work nearly as well. So if you want to get the full capabilities of the saw, you have to have HP batteries. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the grips. Now the grips on this particular tool they're decent enough. The rear grip I have no complaints about, and it's very comfortable. There's plenty of rubberized texture up and down it, and it feels like it's a fairly nice quality rubberized texture with indentations, grooves, and just, you know, areas for you to easily maintain your grip on this particular tool. And there's enough room here so that if you wear thick gloves, you can still access the trigger easily, and the grip isn't so thick that people with smaller sized hands will find it uncomfortable. So the rear grip is very good on this particular tool, no complaints there. The forward grip is where I have some issues, unfortunately, though. It is a little bit thicker than some other tools I own, say like my Makita reciprocating saw, but it's not too bad, and it's still fairly easy to control even if you have smaller hands. My main gripe here, however, is the fact that this particular cover that goes over the front of the tool, because it's not, you know, rubberized texture that's been, you know, directly spread onto the tool, it's a cover, it's a sleeve, and it can peel back fairly easy along several different spots. I haven't had any issues with it becoming twisted or anything like that yet, but this is just an area of the tool that I feel like that they could have put a little bit more effort into, you know, having a little bit better fitting or form-fitting, you know, design that is a little bit tighter, that doesn't feel as loose in your hands. So this is an area of the tool that I wish was a little bit better. It just doesn't feel like it's that great of a, you know, cover, and it just doesn't feel like a high-quality design. It just doesn't feel like a typical Ryobi product, unfortunately. So quite frankly, I think this is an area of the tool that could use some improvement. Another thing about this particular cover I don't like is that this area at the front is there's kind of a, you know, a pocket or an indentation or just an area where stuff like sawdust or wood chips can get stuck, and a lot of times if you're working in an area and you're trying to keep it clean, if you're carrying your saw out and it happens to go like this at all, you know, face down, or, you know, the forward down, the stuff will fall out and, you know, it'll just scatter debris all over the place, and I just don't like this. I would much prefer having the debris fall directly free wherever you're working, so you don't have to worry about wood chippings and shavings, you know, getting stuck there and then getting transported to other areas of your, you know, work project or location. So quite frankly, this is an area of the tool that I wish that they would, you know, modify a little bit so the debris would just fall free wherever you're currently working. So overall, the rear grip is good, the forward grip could use an improvement, but the ergonomics are decent enough. So it gets a pass for the most part, but this is an area of the tool that could use some improvement. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the trigger and safety. Now, starting off with the safety, it's a fairly good design. It's going to be a simple push button design, so you push it all the way to the right and it is disengaged, and so when you pull the trigger, well, you can easily turn the motor on. And when you push it all the way to the left, the safety is becoming engaged. And while you can, pull on the trigger, nothing's going to really happen, and it's sort of locked out. But keep in mind that if you do pull on the trigger when the safety is engaged, the LED lights that are on this particular reciprocating saw will still become activated. But since it has an enclosed handle, it probably won't be a big issue if it's in a bag of tools or anything. But it's just something to be aware of, that, well, it doesn't lock out the light function. So yeah, something, to keep in mind. Now, the variable speed on this particular reciprocating saw is actually quite good, and it's fairly easy to access all the speeds. So let me go ahead and show you real quick what that looks like. So it's got a pretty good slow speed. It's not as slow as some people might like, but it's better than other reciprocating saws I've reviewed in the past, so I'm okay with it considering the price point. The variable speed range is fairly good, and it's a fairly slow uptick in the different speeds. There are a few jumps or a few steps there that are a little bit sharper, but for the most part, it's a fairly good showing here, and I don't really have too much to complain about with the trigger on this particular reciprocating saw considering the price point. So at the end of the day, I think they did a fairly good job with the safety and trigger on this particular reciprocating saw, and I think it's an okay, an acceptable performance considering the price point. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the pivoting shoe, and yeah, that's about all that I can say here. It has very limited range of motion. It's not adjustable in or out. It's fixed into place. It's not easily removable. It's a typical old school design, and I really do like the rigid design much, much better, where you can actually adjust the length, and it's got a little bit more of, adjustability when it comes to the pivoting action. So this is a very basic design, and I was hoping that Ryobi would update the design on a new reciprocating saw that's replacing this one, but unfortunately it doesn't look like that they're going to do that. So yeah, it's, Ryobi's being Ryobi. They innovate up to a point, and then they don't innovate anymore. So quite frankly, this is an area of the saw that I think could use some improvement, but with this, on this particular saw, we didn't get that, and on the next generation, it doesn't look like we got it there either. So just something to be aware of. Moving on. Okay, next up we have the blade release lever and blade clamp. And if you've watched any of my videos, I'm probably not a big fan of these, lever style releases. If anything happens to the mechanism, a lot of times what can happens is the rod will become bent because it's hit something too many times, or it's gotten warm and it's become deformed, and then the mechanism won't release the blade because it's become misaligned. And that's why I don't like having the levers here. I like having the mechanism on the rod itself, but unfortunately we did not get that with this particular tool, and the mechanism is on the side. So it's a simple enough design. You push up, you insert the blade into the clamp on the inside of the tool. The blade clamp mechanism goes back in there pretty far, so it can be a little bit hard to see depending on how far the blade clamp head is, or in and out, depending on what the stroke is currently at on the inside of the tool. So it's one of those things where it's just not the best design here. The blade clamp itself, I haven't had any issues with it dropping blades or anything like that. I know when this saw first came out that it had a reputation for dropping blades, but for me personally, it's done a fairly good job at retaining the blades and not dropping anything yet. So I've been fairly happy with that in that regard. But I'm just not a huge fan of these lever style mechanisms, and I would much prefer a mechanism like you'll find on some of their other saws, or their newer saws, where the mechanism is on the outside, like on this particular saw, where the blade clamp releases here, and so you can always access it even if the rod becomes bent. So this is definitely my preferred style, but this saw is old enough that they didn't incorporate it yet. So just something to be aware of. But for me personally, I would much prefer having the mechanism on the outside, like on this particular saw. So with that being said, everything here works as intended, but just hopefully you won't run into any issues with the rod becoming bent or misaligned. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the LED lights, and it's a fairly good showing here. The LED lights are located directly above the blade clamp, and there are two of them, which is kind of a cool design. When you pull the trigger, they will become activated, and they will remain lit for about 10 seconds after you release the trigger, so there is an afterglow function present. It produces a fairly cool white light, and it does actually illuminate a fairly good amount of area, unlike the lights on their drills. Ryobi, that's something you need to fix. Go back to your old tri-beam illumination, or just fix your your lights on your drills. They're very dim, and I'm not a big fan of that. So quite frankly, I think they did a fairly good job here, and while they may not be the brightest lights in the world, they're definitely better than what you'll find on their drills. So let me go ahead and show you what that light actually looks like. Okay, as you can tell, the light is going to be, it's a little bit dimmer than what it actually is in real life. It's a little bit brighter than this, but you know, for the most part, it is producing a lot of shadows because of the shoe and because of the blade, but it's still putting out quite a bit of light, and you can actually definitely use this to walk by if you're, you know, somewhere and the lights go out or your flashlight dies. You can use this to, you know, get somewhere or look around if worst comes to worst. But so I have to say, I do think they did a fairly good job with the LED beads on this particular reciprocating saw, and it is a function that I like to see. So quite frankly, I'm pretty happy with the overall LED beads on this particular tool, and I don't have any major complaints. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the next part of this particular tool. So yeah. Okay, without a battery, the saw weighs 2,507 grams, which is about 5.5 pounds. And with an HP 4 amp hour battery, the tool weighs 3,223 grams, which is going to be about 7.1 pounds. So it's fairly middle of the pack when it comes to a full-size battery-operated reciprocating saw. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, let's talk about this saw in use, and I have to say it's better than it was, but it's still not a fantastic saw. It's an okay saw, but it really is a basic saw. It vibrates quite a bit in use, not so much that it's uncomfortable to hold, but you know, it definitely doesn't have any sort of vibration suppression, and overall the amount of power that it produces is adequate when you're using HP batteries. But if you ever use a more powerful reciprocating saw, even in a similar price bracket, it just doesn't really live up to any expectation of the price tag or the price that they're asking for, at least before it went on clearance. So it just isn't a great saw, to be honest. I think that they've fixed some of the issues in the past. When the saw first came out, there was definitely some issues with it dropping blades, and the motor definitely seemed to get hot and smell like it was about to burn out constantly. And that's why I ended up returning it the first time I purchased it. But now that this particular saw is about to be phased out, it was on a clearance rack, and so I decided to pick one up to see just if they had, if they had fixed any of the issues, because, Ryobi will do that. And they did fix those two issues I previously mentioned about the overheating and the dropping of blades. So they have done a few things to make it better, but like I said earlier, it just doesn't have a lot of the modern day creature comforts that a lot of the more premium saws are beginning to offer, such as the depth adjustable shoe, rafter hook, or an orbital function. So I definitely think there are some major areas where they could innovate on the next model, but the problem is they didn't. And on the next model, all they did was really add a rafter hook, which is a nice addition, I will give them that, but it really is still a fairly basic reciprocating saw. I don't think they added a adjustable shoe, judging by the promotional pictures and information they have on the website, and there's no orbital function either, so, it's still a very basic reciprocating saw. I do believe on the future model, they did make it more powerful, but that's always a question of just how much more powerful, and is it worth waiting for the newer generation, or is it worth picking one of these up on clearance for a discounted price? And that will have to be up to you. I picked one up at a discounted price because I figured it might be a good tool to retest, and I am glad I picked it up again on a discount, because it's nice to have all the same kind of battery when you're going to a job site, so you don't have to bring two different tool systems with you. So quite frankly, there are reasons to buy it, but at the same time, I will use my rigid reciprocating saw far more often than this particular rigid, this saw, just because of just how much more powerful and the features that the rigid has. So I definitely think there are some more areas on this particular saw that they could innovate on. So with that being said, let's go ahead and recap with the pros and cons, and then we'll finish out the video. 18 volt, this will work with all your Ryobi 18 volt lithium batteries, but if you want to get the maximum performance out of this particular tool, you will have to use HP batteries in order to power it, so just keep that in mind. Moving on to the next pro. And the next pro is two LEDs. The two LEDs definitely provide quite a bit of illumination for a tool light, and they definitely will come in handy, so in my opinion, this is a pro. And the next pro would be the trigger. The trigger is fairly accurate and provides you pretty good control over the different amounts of variable speeds. So it's easy to achieve the slower speeds, and it's easy to achieve the faster speeds, and the range is quite good. So in my opinion, the trigger is a pro in this particular tool. Power when using an HP battery. Overall, the amount of power that this tool can provide when using an HP battery is, fairly decent, and it definitely is going to be the most powerful reciprocating saw in Ryobi's tool lineup. So in my opinion, this is a pro. And the first and only meh would be the blade release lever. I don't like the blade release levers, and I would much prefer having the blade release mechanism on the, rod that holds onto the blade itself. So quite frankly, this is a meh because, well, different people have different opinions, and some people like these levers. But for me personally, it's just kind of meh. And the first con would be the loose front grip. Overall, the sleeve that holds onto the front grip is on the loose side, and I can understand that it might be a tactic for them to reduce the amount of vibrations reaching your hands, but for me personally, I would rather just have it attached to the tool firmly and securely so it makes me feel like I have better control over the tool. So in my opinion, this is a con. And the next con would be that the front end of this particular tool loves to hold on to dust and then release it where you don't want it to release it. So in my opinion, this is definitely a con. And the next con would be the fact that there are no hooks, clips, or strap points on this particular tool, so good luck setting this down in wet conditions, or when you're working on top of a ladder. And the last con would be that, well, it's just a very basic saw. There really are no special features other than the fact it has an LED light, and quite frankly, that's really all it has going for it. So in my opinion, this is just kind of a basic con. And that's it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular reciprocating saw, and do I still hate it? Kinda. It's not as bad as it was, but it definitely is not the primary saw in my tool collection that I reach for when I need to get a reciprocating saw out. This particular saw has a place in my tool collection, and that's so that I can take all one kind of battery to a particular, work area. But this particular saw just doesn't have the amount of power or oomph that a lot of the more premium saws in the market can provide, and quite frankly, it's about to be replaced with a whole new saw, which will probably be a better deal, to be quite honest with you about. Now, this particular saw, if you can pick it up on clearance, isn't going to be a half-bad saw to consider adding to your tool collection if all you have is a brushed Ryobi reciprocating saw. But if you already have a brushless reciprocating saw, or, you don't necessarily need a full-sized reciprocating saw, I would probably just wait and buy the newer model because that one's supposed to be a bit better. So, quite frankly, if you can find this on clearance, I would recommend picking it up. But if you can't find it on clearance, I would just wait for the newer model. So, with that being said, that's it for this video, and we will see you all next time. God bless. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time. God bless.